Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, MedTech Canada Speaker Series, Paradigm Shift in Medical Device Development. Before we begin, I would like to go through some housekeeping notes. All participant microphones will remain muted to avoid background noise. Please do not unmute yourself during the session. And if you have any question or comment, use the Q&A button on the top of your screen or the chat button if you are experiencing any problems, and I'll try my best to assist you. This webinar is being recorded, and following the session, the recording will be available to all registered participants through our website and through MIDI. We are very excited to have two distinguished speakers with us today from MIDI, a leader in medical life science and healthcare product innovation. We have Christopher Montalbano, CEO and engineering development leader at MIDI. Chris is the co-founder of MIDI with a background in mechanical engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and an MBA from Hofstra University. Since joining MIDI in 1988, he has been driving product excellence, innovation, and forward thinking for clients across the medical, life science, and home healthcare markets. Joining with him is Andrew Martin, Vice President of Advanced Development at MIDI. With a degree in product engineering and development from Rochester Institute of Technology, Andrew has led over 36 successful product development programs worldwide. His expertise spans medical instrumentation, diagnostics, user interface design, and product strategy, earning him multiple design awards and patents. With that, let's get started. Over to you, Chris.
Oh, thank you very much, Karen, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending the webinar. Let me share my screen. And then start the presentation. So again, what we have here is we're going to be talking about the innovation roadmap for medical device development. So fostering innovation and optimum programmatic direction under strategic regulatory deployment. Now, at the top of your screen, you'll see some Teams functions. There's a Q&A button. So as we're going through the presentation, feel free to leave some notes or questions that you have, and we'll get to answer those towards the end of the presentation. So MIDI, just to fill you in on who MIDI is all about. So MIDI is a medical development consulting firm. We develop medical devices, software as medical devices. We get involved in the biopharma industry also. We've been doing it for 50 years. We're based both in the New York City area, Toronto. Also now we opened up an office in Jacksonville, Florida. We've completed decades of successful healthcare programs, have clocked thousands of hours of user-driven research, and deploy a unique process called development DNA, which is our innovation roadmap. And we'll be talking a lot about the innovation roadmap and the development DNA process and how it infuses innovation and competitive differentiation into medical devices, whether they're physical devices or software devices. And all of this is under the FDA-QSR and ISO 13485, so you comply with the Health Canada's needs, the FDA's needs, and European needs. And it's grounded in a concurrent engineering methodology we call DFX, Designing for X, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the agenda, so we're going to define what the paradigm shift is in medical device development, and then define the characteristics that make up innovative devices. We're then going to go through the innovation roadmap and the 3 stops along that roadmap from concept through to commercialization. So stop 1 is discovery research, uncovering healthcare opportunities. Stop 2 is technology innovation, meaning the agile R&D process. And stop 3 is commercialization and implementation, so preparing for market under regulatory controls. We'll then do a summary on the strategic development disciplines and methods deployed during stop 3, and then jump into some case studies and show how this innovation roadmap process is applied to different case studies. Then we'll have some Q&A on that. Hold on a second. I'm trying to get my slide deck to respond. Okay, there we go. So the paradigm shift in medical device development. So what is that paradigm shift as related to medical device development and the innovation roadmap? So as related to that shift, the common perception in the industry is that the medical regulatory design controls and risk management, meaning FDA-QSR ISO 13485 as an example, or Health Canada requirements, are often viewed as a mandate, a process that will inhibit device innovation. So our perception shift as related to this is in using the recommendations, meaning the FDA calls it guidance, the regulations and the design control and risk management required by the FDA as a viable medical device development innovation platform, given a properly outlined innovation roadmap, which MIDI calls development DNA. So as a result, the FDA guidance is designed to cooperate with developers, encouraging innovation. So from what we've seen in interfacing with clients and in the industry and when we're developing devices, there appears to be some trepidation in the industry about the process of developing a medical device because of what some assume is the complicated process of satisfying the FDA requirements to make a device ready for market. The FDA not only, I will call it, prescribes the detailed method by which to step a medical device through its development process, but also wants to see that company or companies associated with the development have minted this process with their essential DNA, meaning the process is documented within the organization's quality management system, or otherwise known as QMS. So that QMS is a manual which points to a multitude of SOPs, standard operating procedures. And many of these procedures deal with the very product development realization process we're discussing today. So MIDI's innovation roadmap, which we call development DNA, is minted into our QMS and is consistently deployed for our clients. So let's talk about device innovation. So we've been referencing the word innovation multiple times. Let's dive into what that means. So device innovation is a process that translates an invention into a device, which creates value for the user. So it must, number one, satisfy a specific market user need, either an unmet need, meaning a first-of-a-kind device, or an existing need resulting from an augmented device, meaning superior satisfaction of the need. Second, it needs to be reproducible at an economical cost, which the market will accept. Additionally, be effective, both from a ease of use perspective and from a functional perspective, and be safe to the user and to the public, which is expected of a medical device. So decomposing the definition a bit further, the area the FDA is most interested in is it being effective for the intended user, which includes functional performance and the ease of use, and be safe to all stakeholders, caregivers, and patients. So the FDA prescribes the detailed method of achieving effective and safe, but also has recommendations or guidance on how to perform earlier stages or stops on this innovation roadmap journey, which includes market exploration and technology innovation via R&D. So during this webinar, we'll make stops along this innovation roadmap and decompose these stops, describing activities deployed which yield innovation while conforming with the FDA-QSR on ISO 13485. So this is the paradigm shift, and our goal is to convey how one can have a change in perception as related to realizing that FDA's recommendations and prescriptions are structured to yield innovation as opposed to stunt it or diminish innovation. So talking about the stops before we go into detail about each stop. So the three stops again are stop one, discovery research, uncovering healthcare opportunities. Stop two, technology innovation, the agile R&D process. And stop three, commercialization and implementation, preparing for that market launch under regulatory controls. So in order to first, before we dive into the details of stop 1, 2, and 3, we want to present a high-level sort of timeline graphic that shows the sequence of the stops and regulatory tasks. And thereafter, we'll dive into a deeper analysis on each of these stops. So here's the timeline. So what you're seeing on the screen here are the steps or stops, stop 1, 2, and 3. Realize stop 1 and 2, we call it the sandboxing development, an agile product development approach. Stop 3 is a waterfall approach. It's when you're ready to commercialize. So it's under design controls. This line is showing a separation between stop 1 and 2 before moving to stop 3, that formal design controls begin here. So again, what that means, if design controls haven't been introduced prior to this, this is why we call it sandboxing. You're a little less constrained. You're free to ideate and innovate and come up with next step solutions without those constraints. So in stop 1, you're doing research to come up and ideate and conceive a new product and unmet need. You're doing investigations out in the market, interviews, research, establishing initial design requirements for the program. And it's also an opportunity to then take those concepts and then de-risk them through proof of concept iterations, again, prior to design controls and risk management, to iterate and ideate and de-risk from a technology perspective, but also from a usability perspective. You can make mock-ups and introduce them to end users, and we'll get into that in a little more depth in a second. Next, once you've de-risked and you've gone through your proof of concept stop, you need to deploy design controls and risk management, and then use that as a guideline to engineer against, generating prototypes, alpha prototypes, beta prototypes, until you have a design freeze. Since that design is under design controls and risk management, that commercialized design, you're ready to do verification and validation. So the verification is engineering testing to confirm the design inputs meet the design outputs, and validation testing, meaning user testing, to demonstrate the intended use and indication for use can be achieved. At that point, once you've had a successful transfer through those stages, you could deploy a design transfer to manufacturing, let's say a contract manufacturer, to then set up production of the system. So in stop 1, we want to emphasize here that the FDA is absolutely a team player, encouraging the process of medical device development. They don't want to impede the process of development. They want to encourage it in a way that'll make business sense for your company, which is why they provide the recommendation of performing what we are calling stop 1 on this innovation roadmap, the market exploration and discovering opportunities. So the FDA wants the device development team to think preemptively. So although realize that the FDA has an additional objective in mind for this stop, if we were to look ahead on this journey down the innovation roadmap, we'll see that once regulatory controls are required to be put into play within the medical device development process at stop 3, meaning commercialization, there will be properties and information derived from these initial unconstrained first stops, which act as a framework to inform the design controls and risk management process and allow the development team to stay on track with the collection of requirements to feed that process. So in essence, the FDA realizes that at stop 3 under regulatory controls, the development team would become like a ship without a rudder if in stop 1, the market exploration was not performed and/or not performed effectively. So in this regard, the FDA has our back and is interested in seeing corporate success in the medical marketplace. Now, of course, the FDA wants a device to be designed to be effective and safe, which are the third and fourth characteristics of device innovation we define. Stop 3, commercialization and implementation under design controls, is all about addressing these third and fourth characteristics. So the first and second characteristics of device innovation involving a company discerning specific market and user needs while doing this at an economical cost that the market will bear, providing profit, is quite an important first step. Actually, it's an absolute must and is setting the stage for establishing a value proposition or a value handshake between the corporation and the external stakeholders, such as doctors and patients, purchasing decision makers, insurance reimbursement, and more. So if bidirectional value is being exchanged, you'll be preparing for a successful journey in the development. Now, again, in stop one, that value proposition. So we could decompose that value proposition into two components, the external stakeholder needs and the internal stakeholder needs. Internal stakeholder needs, meaning corporate needs from a business perspective. So it's important to start with exploring methods to obtain external needs. This is often what unlocks innovation and competitive differentiation. Important methods that MIDI deploys in this regard are, from an external needs perspective, target market identification weighed against your corporate goals and objectives, ranking the target market and hitting top tier markets first. Also, external stakeholder identification for your company's target market. And this is the first step in gathering external needs, which is identifying the stakeholder. So as mentioned, stakeholders include not only the doctors and the patients, but any associated gatekeepers on the purchasing side and insurance reimbursement side. Voice of the customer is another important tool. So going out in the field to observe the environment and discern current clinical needs and to explore the prospect of unmet stakeholder needs. Then looking at user interaction. It's also important to view firsthand unspoken needs that may be revealed by field studies. And then workflow analysis, task mapping, and usage ceremony is key to see what is being performed by each stakeholder pre-use, during use, and post-use. Each stakeholder has their own workflow. For example, a doctor's workflow will be different from the assistant's workflow. So MIDI deploys research methods and tools when discovering and uncovering internal stakeholder needs, meaning the internal needs of its clients from a business perspective to strategically position them in a way where they're pursuing an innovative direction which will yield profit with a defensible market position via strategic differentiation. So some of these methods and tools MIDI uses in this regard are the competitive market analysis tied to a ranking and rating analysis of device solution attributes to identify gaps, unmet market opportunities, or insufficient addressed clinical needs. Doing a SWOT analysis, the strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats of your company weighed against your competition or lack thereof. This will help identify your call to action on the ideal go-to-market path strategy. Now, this all feeds into an MRD, meaning a market requirement document. So once the external and internal data is collected and analyzed, an MRD is established. This sets an informed direction for the next stop of the innovation roadmap, stop 2, which is the technology innovation, the agile R&D process. And the tool that can be used while doing this would be like cloud-based repositories to collect your design control materials. So we use a tool called Matrix One in the cloud. So, referencing back to one of the FDA's objectives, that it's important to think preemptively so you utilize stop one's discovery market requirements in the design control document for use in stop 3. So now is the time to start feeding these requirements that you captured in stop 1 into a repository to be later used as the beginning of the design control document. So at MIDI, as I mentioned, we use this Matrix One design control tool, capture it in stop 1, and then deploy it and utilize it in stop 3. So just summarizing a bit, so we talked about this uncovering the healthcare needs in stop 1, conducting user-driven research, identifying stakeholder differences and needs, the different stakeholders, doing the interviews, doing the user interaction in a field context, and all under this discovery research methodology. But at the same time, it's important to realize in stop 1, it's your time to be preemptive from a a regulatory perspective, to start to think about the inputs that need to go into your process, meaning what is the intended use of the device? What is the indication for use? What are your market claims going to be? Preemptive market claims. You could tweak them as you're going along, but trying to define those up front. Current standard of care that you're addressing, insurance reimbursement potential in the markets. And the reason we call the first two staged, intended use and indication of use, it's important, especially for, let's say, startup companies, to realize they may have an ultimate goal in mind for an intended use or an indication of use of their technology that would require a lot of clinical data collection and a lot more time to get to market. But if you stage your intended use or indication of use, where you say, okay, is there a first easier to market intended use, indication of use that will get you to market quicker, that maybe requires less clinical data collection or maybe no clinical data collection. Maybe it's implying something's happening and not definitively saying something is clinically happening. That allows you to get to market quicker, start collecting data preemptively, paid data. You're being paid to collect the data. Then you use that data to build your case for the ultimate intended use. So that's why we say stage. Sometimes it's important to stage out your thoughts and your plans and how you're going to launch the product or the succession of revs of the product. So the regulatory strategy for intended use. So, thinking, this is more obvious, but is it device related, meaning physical device, software is a medical device? Is it a drug or biologic? Are you going after the EU, the US market, the Canadian market? Is it a 510K de novo or PMA? Are you going to need clinical trials? Have we thought out insurance reimbursement? Also, the regulatory strategy will have impact on your IP, your intellectual property, your insurance reimbursement strategy, your time to market strategy, and investor education and expectations. So, as far as the tools in stop one, so we evaluate and pick and implement tools that'll be used during the design control process. So we start to collect those requirements informally. We at MIDI use a tool called Matrix One. There are other tools like Greenlight Guru and others that allow you to capture that information. Since you're still in the sandbox during stop one, the design controls and risk management aren't implemented yet. Only informal capture of those requirements is being done. So it allows you to stay a little looser and agile in your methods. And then as you enter stop two, you're going to start building out that tool set. So as you complete stop three, you'll be referencing those design control and risk management documents as part of your submission. So what we're going to do is transition into stop two and stop three. And Andrew Martin is going to speak to those slides.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so stop two is where the rubber meets the road, where we're going to start to culminate all what we learned from stop one, which includes, discovery research and the systems analysis, the IP creation and all the stakeholder inputs, that Chris has detailed, and start to develop kind of a multi-pronged approach to de-risk our device. And you fundamentally have basically three kind of POCs or sprints that you want to conduct. One being the human machine interface. So you want to get mock-ups in hand. Those don't have to be functional, but it's good to introduce stakeholders to the form factor that you're targeting. Also, obviously the device function. So doing desktop functional testing to ensure that your system architecture is appropriate and that you have true efficacy relative to the technology path that you've chosen as a team. And then wireframing. So quickly using tools like Figma to step stakeholders through the digital human-machine interface, right? So we have a physical form typically with a device. If you're purely software, your human-machine interface is going to be strictly from a software perspective. So critical again at this point to get things built up in a minimum viable fashion and to introduce them to your stakeholders and in your internal team to build experience within the team and to make sure that you have good product market fit relative to your indications for use. And this is a major point where you can de-risk your program. So it could be that you don't have an appropriate sensor or your limit of detection is not appropriately specified. This is where you're going to find out what you're capable of relative to the tools that you have at hand. And again, all this is being recorded with a tool with Matrix One, whether you're using that or another cloud tool. We're always updating in our process our digital repository of the design history file so that we're not missing out on those learned observations. In addition to proving, with our stakeholders and within our internal team, the technology and its fundamental efficacy, there's also an opportunity here to develop intellectual property. So we're going to observe things as a team as we bring things to life that were not necessarily obvious in paper studies, right? So, we're going to lay out in paper studies and stop one and use our best ability to develop a system architecture, to mock up mechanical configurations, to mock up electrical engineering choices. And then as we develop it and bring it into the physical world and bring it into actual software, we're going to observe, usability. We're going to observe possibly synergy between sensors that are going to provide lots of fertile ground for intellectual property development. So sample preparation, et cetera. All these things are going to feed into our process and help bolster our client and our team's intellectual property footprint, which ultimately is going to be, part of the success strategy. So we're going through iterative MVP studies, as I mentioned, and we're, again, getting feedback from all of our stakeholders. All these things are as iterative as they need to be, and we want to be able to introduce, feedback and quickly understand that feedback and implement it without having the burden of the design history file, early on within the R&D process. Next slide, Chris. All that culminates into stop 3, which is the commercialization and implementation. So preparing for the market under regulatory controls. So we're going to feed all the existing data from stop 1 and stop 2. As we have been documenting this as we go along, and ultimately culminate that into the planning, design controls, risk management, verification, validation, and maintain the cloud design history file. We're at a waterfall point now. Again, so we had a sandbox, so we were able to iterate quickly and use an agile process. Now we're in a waterfall deployment of our solution. So we have to be very tightly coupled to our requirements and make sure that we have true verification and validation for each one of our requirements. And at this point, we're using an external lab, right, to provide a non-biased party relative to our verification testing. So along our process of R&D, again, we're modifying our user requirements as we learn from our user inputs. We're modifying our design and development plan and tailoring our solution so that there's no surprises relative to the end result, the end product development. So within stop 3, we have usability analysis, ergonomic analysis, industrial design, mechanical and manufacturing engineering, electrical software engineering, IOMT development, design for X analysis, and regulatory management and submission. So we're fully using all of our capabilities to bring this product to market.
Thanks, Andrew. What we're going to go through now is a quick walkthrough to provide a little more depth on the development disciplines that are required during stop 3. And some of these disciplines will vary based upon the type of device or you're designing, or whether it's a software as a medical device. So usability, usability generates meaningful product relationships. So again, we can't overemphasize looking at the interaction and environmental observation in a field context. For the devices, often there are insights that come of that, especially when you're looking at competitive systems and how they're used, or enhancements that the key opinion leaders want to see on competitive units. So really hands-on is important. Looking at their workflow and task analysis firsthand to try to minimize and simplify the number of steps involved to get from the beginning to the end of any one task, whether it's setup or deployment in a clinical setting. And this is all under IEC 62366 for usability of engineering and medical devices. So, but tied to that, depending upon your type of device and looking at the ergonomics of the situation, for example, if it's a device that's intimate or wearable, you would want to hit on all of these ergonomic fronts. If it is something that's more static or tabletop, less of these fronts. So getting into the cognitive ergonomics, physical, anthropometric, and kinesiology and biomechanics side of ergonomics. And then the industrial design, where the innovation breakthroughs occur. So going through the product architecture strategy and mapping, looking at the competitive, complementary, and adjacent systems that are out there, doing some design trend forecasting, visual brand language, and then the usability and human factors and coming up with mock-ups to down select the direction to go, both physical mock-ups if it's a physical device, but also on the software side, as Andrew mentioned, using tools like Figma to do wireframing, to step through the storyboarding on the usage ceremony of those interfaces, whether they're on a touch screen on the device or whether it's an app or in the cloud. And then the engineering at the heart of the innovation success for your program. So examples of tools we use, if it's physical, we'll use SolidWorks. If we're doing FEA, we'll use ANSYS. And on the right side of the screen, this is how we think in terms of concurrent engineering. We're thinking about the X and the DFX, and especially the DFM and the DFA. And what are the quantities produced per year? And how does that apply to making sense from a tooling investment perspective? And what material sets do we have available for each piece part in the assembly? And any one assembly might have a multitude of different material types that are deployed based upon the needs of the parts, and tooling types based upon the quantities that would be produced. At the electrical engineering discipline powering the development process. So the right side, thinking about the embedded system approach. We use Altium as our tool to do the schematics and layouts. Thinking about your chipset approach from a power consumption perspective and trying to minimize power consumption, but also from a wireless communication perspective, and based upon the preemptive requirements you collected from the users on their environment that they need to address, will help guide you on the wireless methods to deploy, and then programming for that at a firmware level and operating system level, like on a SOM chip. And then thinking about the Internet of Things as a discipline perspective. So obviously there's the programming of it from a software perspective, but strategically thinking of the Internet of Things or the Internet of Medical Things as, which ties into software as a medical device, so thinking of it as a remote service offering. So the ability to allow the customer to tap into your capabilities, you to tap into their data collection, and trying to define a value handshake or a value proposition between you and each key opinion leader to define what that information flow will be, what that level of control will be, and how it benefits your company and how it benefits the end user, because then it benefits both. And you're shaking hands at that point. And then the DFX. So what is this X we're talking about? It's the M and the A, which you're familiar with. It's cost optimization, designed for testability, testing, designed for supply chain and supply constraints, thinking about that preemptively up front, designed for disposable or recyclable, designed for service and maintenance and reliability. So these are all important things to take into account. So now what we'd like to do is I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew, and he's going to take you through some case studies that will help explain the application of what we've just discussed to some past programs that we've worked on.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so this program is with Forest Devices. This is an ambulatory EEG device. This culminates in all the stuff that we've been talking about. And understanding, again, our key stakeholders, understanding our user environment for this was very critical, right? Because this is an ambulatory device that's going to be out in the elements. So you have high heat, low temperature, you have ingress protection, so dust and water, and you have an EEG signal, which is going to be very sensitive to noise, right? So signal to noise ratio is going to be critical on this. So within this program, understanding those key requirements from the stakeholders was critical to document up front. And then that led us to a number of bench tests to confirm our fundamental functionality, mostly around signal to noise, right? One of the interesting intellectual properties that came out of that was the cap that was used to deploy the EEG device in the field in an ambulatory environment with a rapid, basically kind of like a ketchup pack, if you can think of that, for your hydrogel to establish a electrical link to the patient's scalp. And that's what we use to, again, enhance the signal to noise for this device. And that came out of that R&D process that we talked about in the sandbox process. Ultimately, learning through many iterations, putting things in stakeholders' hands, and then developing a beta unit, alpha unit, then a beta unit to do verification testing, actually within a clinical trial in Alberta, Canada. And this device ultimately achieved FDA clearance, and it's in the marketplace. This program is a stim clip. So this is a neurostimulation of the vagus nerve to enhance platelet activity. And again, similar, and we've all been through these trials and tribulations relative to our desires and the ultimate culmination of those desires in the product that we develop. For this, it was critical to do testing relative to the waveform shape of the stimulation. So going through many iterations within the electrical lab to make sure that we have proper waveform to provide the stimulation, and doing many studies relative to that waveform profile. In addition was the actual human machine interface. For this program, the HMI was actually pretty complicated based on the variation of the human head and the human ear. So having a lot of degrees of freedom, which you can see in the animation, we've got many degrees of freedom to allow us to provide the stimulation link to the inside of the patient's ear. So this, again, getting the device in stakeholders' hands as soon as possible, getting benchtop verification within our group, and then ultimately leveraging all that into alpha, beta, and production.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So we're going to jump into Q&A at this point. Before we move on to that, we'd like to conclude by saying, following an innovation roadmap type process and integrating it into your quality management system and providing what we're calling sandbox creative space in the beginning to ideate and innovate, yet not under design controls and risk management, is key. And this will free up your team to explore what resonates with the market with development of creative proof of concepts addressing efficacy. It's also an important opportunity to de-risk the design. Thereafter, you use the requirements defined in the sandbox stops, meaning stop 1 and 2, to inform your commercialization process under design controls and risk management, preparing a design that addresses DFX, that is ready for clinical trials, preparing you for a successful FDA and Health Canada submission with a well-received market launch. So I believe for us to see the questions, we need to stop sharing and take a look if there's any questions there. Let's see. The one question is, at which stage we should tailor the MD development approach based on the complex compliance requirements in different markets. So, you know, as related to trying to conceive the approach that you're going to take, it's important to do it as early on as possible before you, definitely before you deploy design controls and risk management. So if you could do it in stop 1, that would be good. If not, at the latest by the end of stop 2, when you're sort of de-risking and you're doing your proof of concepts, to really set the stage for proper build out of your design history file, which will then, if you follow that design history file when you're doing commercialization engineering, you know, you'll ultimately achieve a successful submission or be on your way to achieving a successful submission. I know another question that came in that we were looking at said, what if my design inputs are not finalized? So if your design inputs aren't finalized at this point, you know, we use an agile, or you could call it Scrum, proof of concept approach in stop 2, which has sprints, and it recognizes that inputs might not be finalized and need discovery. Another question is, significant FDA change underway and in news. Any commentary for implication for innovation? So, you know, the FDA evolves. They are not, usually the moves they make are not ground shattering, but evolutionary. And in that process, the overall approach to how you basically try to prevent avoiding design controls and risk management by staying in the sandbox and doing your thing versus then locking down under those design controls will still be in place. Some of the rules and sets on how what you're loading into the design control documents is related to the IEC requirements and the regulation, and then the whole alignment of the FDA-QSR and ISO 13485 gets into the details of what you're actually loading into the design control documents. But at a high level, the approach would remain similar, the approach that we had described. Another question was, where do you find your inspiration for innovation, and does the FDA compliance damper this innovation? So we've configured our development DNA process to not only comply with the FDA, but also to yield innovation design results. And in this regard, one area of innovation inspiration is in observing user needs. and the workflow environments and the use of direct or indirect competitive systems. So the documentation of user requirements is an FDA requirement, so they encourage these types of activities. And let's see, one last question was, what is MIDI's preferred embedded system design and mechanical design software packages when doing wearable device development? So again, we use Altium for our tool of choice, and also SolidWorks. Another question that popped up, is the webinar being recorded? And yes, it is, and it will be distributed. I see that was already answered in the Teams. Beat me to it. So those, if there aren't any other questions, we don't see any other questions in the post. We want to thank you for attending the webinar. So it will be distributed. And also, if you register on our website, you'll receive alerts on future podcast series and white papers, which include the latest in MedTech developments. And you could do that at midipd.com. And again, we thank you for attending the webinar. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.